How many of you have noticed that communicating with millennials or younger generations can be a little different, right? They don't get real excited when the phone rings. Usually, they would much rather you would just text them. In fact, I heard one of them say recently that she thinks it's rude when people call her. She works in a call center at Fidelity, so that might not work so well for them. But yeah, communication is completely different. About 3 years ago, I was asked to start doing these leadership classes for an organization, and I said, yeah, I was excited. And they said, and at least half of the people attending are going to be young emerging leaders. They're going to be millennials. And I said, oh, I love that. That's so exciting. I can't wait. So I did my usual thing where I send out email messages and I tell them, we're going to be reading this, we're going to be talking about that, we're going to be meeting at this time. Here's a couple of attachments you might find to be helpful. Days went by, no response. A few of the boomers and the Gen Xers responded and said, yeah, we're excited, we're going to be there. Not one younger member of the classes responded. I got there, they were all there, they were excited. I said, did you get my email? They said, no. I said, well, I'm going to send things out email. And they said, okay, we'd really rather have a text, but if you have to, that's fine. Sometimes 3 weeks would go by and I'd have no response from them over any of the emails I sent. So I called my favorite consultants on the topic, my two children, Kiefer and Chloe, and my son said, he's the older one, he said, Mom, that's just how millennials are. You just have to accept this. This is how they function. This is the way they communicate. That was a good reminder. And I thought back to what my mentor, John Maxwell, oftentimes says, and that is that communication and connecting with people is always about them, not about me. So I thought, okay, let's flip this. Let's think about it the way I believe they look at it. And I started texting more frequently. Of course, you know you can't attach things as easily to text messages. So for those of us who like to do that, that's a problem. What I learned to do was I learned to text them and tell them, I'm going to send out an important email this afternoon. Please take time to check it. And I used this sparingly. And sure enough, they'd say, okay, and they'd check the email. So the point of all this is that we have to change our expectations about communication. And I think the best way to do this in an organization is to get together and talk about what are realistic expectations for communicating, and then define those and get buy-in. How frequently should people be checking their email? How quickly should they be responding?